Hello and welcome back to Spill. I'm Amy Westervelt. Just a reminder about what exactly this show is. We are doing regular episodes on climate news and media, and once a month, having a conversation with Mary Annaïse Heglar. It's time for that conversation again, and Mary joined me shortly after the debut of her first novel, Troubled Waters. It came out on May 7th, so it's available everywhere you get your books now. Mary talked about some of the research she did that didn't make its way into the novel explicitly, although it's definitely informed by it. All about a fascinating and terrible guy who tried to block school desegregation in the South. You'll hear Mary talking about her Aunt Jackie in this episode. She was one of the kids who desegregated schools in Nashville. Unfortunately, she is having some health concerns at the moment, so we've stuck a link to a GoFundMe aiming to help her and her family get through that in the show notes. There's also a link there to buy Mary's book, which you should definitely do. And with that, here we go.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
Learning through play starts with Lego Duplo. With Lego Duplo, toddlers can develop real-life skills while having fun with colorful bricks made just for them. Large, easy to grip, and safe to explore. When children express themselves with Lego Duplo, they build patience, problem-solving, and empathy. See your child learn perseverance and self-expression with everything they imagine and create. Visit lego.com/preschool to learn more.
You know that feeling when someone shows up for you just when you need it most? That's what Uber is all about. Not just a ride or dinner at your door. It's how Uber helps you show up for the moments that matter. Because showing up can turn a tough day around or make a good one even better. Whatever it is, big or small, Uber is on the way. So you can be on yours. Uber, on our way.
Hey, Amy.
Hi, how's it going?
Going good. You know, no big deal. I just kind of published my debut novel last
NBD. It's totally fine. I was so excited for you. I'm just like, it's out in the world. It's so cool. And I don't know.
I know, because I've been working on it pretty much since I've known you. I started writing this book in 2019, so it's kind of crazy that it's coming out now. For those who don't know, the name of the book is Troubled Waters. You can and should buy it wherever you get your books at. Amy read an early version and is now reading the current version.
The finished version. Yes.
Yeah.
Which actually is so cool to see how the structure shifted and like different characters shifted. And yeah, it's cool. Very fun to read. Yeah.
You haven't finished it, have you?
I have. I finished it last night in preparation for this conversation. Yes.
Oh, really?
Of course I did.
Well, maybe tell me what you think of it when we're not on air.
Okay. It's great.
Okay, let's stick with that. It's great. Yeah, go buy it. So we've talked a little bit about the novel on this podcast before. And as I've said, the book is basically about the climate change generation and the civil rights generation and the things that go unsaid between them. But a longer way to describe it is that my main character, Corinne, gets radicalized against the oil industry after her brother dies on working on this oil boat. And her grief about her brother and climate change kind of meld together. And she decides that the only way that she can heal is through this big, risky climate action. And that sends her grandmother, Cora, into a panic because she's mourning Cameron, too. This is her grandson. Mm-hmm. She raised both Cora and Corinne. And Corinne's decision kind of forces Cora to reckon with her past as one of the children who integrated the schools in Nashville, Tennessee. Mm-hmm. So I'm literally putting climate change and civil rights movement into conversation together in this novel. As you know, the storyline about Nashville is based very heavily on my family's history. My grandfather was instrumental in the fight for school desegregation in Nashville. In 1955, after Brown versus Board of Education, he and a bunch of other families tried to enroll their children in white schools. That year, he tried to enroll his oldest daughter, Belinda, who happens to be my mother. This is something that I found out when I went to visit the archives. I actually did not know he tried to enroll my mother. Oh. My mother has had a temper since the crib. Like my grandfather would joke about it. Like she would have an attitude like as a literal infant.
Fun fact, same family lore about yours truly, one Amy Westervelt.
Oh, really?
Yes.
You had a temper?
Raw. Yes, apparently I used to like rub my face raw in the crib because I was so mad about being born.
Oh, wow.
Apparently.
I mean, that's something to be mad about. I as an infant I was willful. That was what they said about me.
Oh, okay.
Like
right.
I was gonna get my way as a baby, which you will notice in Corinne in the novel, something we have in common.
Anyway, sorry. So you didn't know that your grandfather had tried to enroll your mother as well.
No. So I wanted to use this time on this episode to talk about some of the things that I learned in my research that I couldn't work into the novel, because in the novel, I'm telling the story of school desegregation from the perspective of Cora, who was a child when all of this happened. So she wouldn't have had a lot of the bigger context. She wouldn't have been thinking, like she's a 5-year-old. She's not thinking about Brown versus Board of Education. In fact, Brown versus Board of Education would have happened when Cora was like 3 years old. She wouldn't have known about that. So there's just a lot of context around it that she actually would not have known. And I also want to zero in on a man named John Kasper, who really, really sucked and was sort of heralded as like the main guy, the main segregationist in Nashville. And to talk about him, because also Cora wouldn't have known about him. She would have known that there was like some dude hanging around, but she wouldn't have known who he was.
All this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I know she wouldn't have known that because my aunt didn't know that. So anyhow, back to the story in Nashville. So my grandfather tries to enroll my mother. When they were denied, he and a bunch of other families joined this lawsuit against the city of Nashville, saying that they were in violation of the federal law, basically the Supreme Court decision. That lawsuit actually wound up making Nashville seriously improve the conditions for Black schools, because they were basically like, okay, they're separate, but we're going to actually make them equal this time. And so they hired a whole bunch of Black teachers. They renovated some of the Black schools. They even built a whole new school, a new high school for Black students called Cameron, which is where my aunt and my mother went to high school, and they love that high school. They still talk about it to this day.
That's cool.
Yeah. But that lawsuit also forced the city to actually come up with a plan for desegregation. That plan went into effect in 1957, and it dictated that the schools would integrate starting with the first grade in 1957, then the second grade in 1958, and then the third grade in 1959, and on and on and on. They called it the Nashville Plan, and it was so effective at stalling that other cities later adopted it.
Wow. That's so interesting, because actually I was thinking about that when I was reading like that part where, well, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but this comes up in the story for Cora, where she's the first kid in each of her classes. But then behind her, there's more.
A code break.
Yeah. That's, oh my God. Also, just a quick aside, I think it's so important and interesting and just great how you told it from the kid's perspective. Because like I've heard you say this about your aunt before too, but like it is totally this missing part of the history around school desegregation, that like the poor kids that had to be the ones doing the desegregation physically themselves went through hell. I mean, that had to have been awful. Yeah. And
so that point when my Aunt Jackie goes to school in 1957, that's when Nashville turns into a powder keg. And I mean that quite literally. At one point, a school was bombed. The city got nasty. It got violent. And in so much of my research, I saw that violence and vitriol was pinned on one man, John Kasper. My mother and my aunt even said the same thing. I found interviews with my grandfather who was saying it too. That was all John Kasper's fault for riling it all up.
Wow.
Now,
what a piece of shit.
I am not going to be up here arguing with my grandfather's old interviews. I'm not going to be arguing with my mom and my aunt because I wasn't alive.
Right.
And there are certain conversations that you're just not qualified to have with your parents when they're older than integration.
Right.
But I do not agree that it was John Kasper's fault. And all of my research shows that it wasn't all his fault. You can't get people to whip people up into that type of hysteria if
unless
there was
it's already in
them. Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
So in order for things to get to the level that they got to, there had to have been a pretty strong racist tension already. And there definitely was. The hell are we talking about? Nashville is in the South, and moreover, it's in America. But I do agree on this. John Kasper sucked.
Totally sucked. Yeah. John Kasper, a historic piece of shit.
Exactly. So today I kind of want to exhume his body and kick it around a little bit. Yeah, it might at some point sound like it's a little personal, and it is, because fuck that dude. So yeah, I wanted to talk a little more about John Kasper. But for the listeners who are wondering what this has to do with climate, first of all, it relates to my novel, and my novel's a climate novel, and you should buy it again. But Amy, I wanted to give you a chance because I know you know a lot about this. What does school desegregation have to do with climate change?
Oh, actually, like a whole lot, because the sort of animating force behind the Koch brothers getting into politics, where they eventually really hijacked the whole system with a huge emphasis on blocking climate action, was Brown versus Board. They were, I mean, they painted as like a states' rights issue, right? As many racists before and since have been wont to do. But yeah, they had a huge reaction to Brown versus Board, as did various other people. There's a book called Democracy in Chains that looks into the work of a guy named James Buchanan, who was an economist in Virginia at the time, who kind of wrote all of the economic papers and policy papers that gave people like the Kochs a political justification to be anti-desegregation as a states' rights issue. So the two are very, very, very intertwined. And I will also say, like, I've been saying this to people a lot lately, that in this very weird way, the right wing is more intersectional than the left, because they've always done racism and climate together, folks. You know?
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So now we have that laid out. Let's go back to the beginning for John Kasper. And I want readers to know that until I get to Nashville, I'm going to be relying very heavily on Rachel L. Martin's amazing book. It's called A Most Tolerant Little Town. It came out last summer, and it tells the story of the very first school to integrate under Brown versus Board of Education, which was Clinton High School in Clinton, Tennessee. While I was working on the book, I read her dissertation, and it was really thrilling to see it made into a book. So I'm also going to tell you to go ahead and buy that book. Awesome. And just a little bit of, I will get to that in a minute, so never mind.
Okay.
Okay, so given what I have told you so far, where do you think John Kasper grew up?
Clinton.
Tennessee?
Yeah, in Tennessee.
You would think that, wouldn't you? John Kasper was born and raised in Merchantville, New Jersey.
What? Get out of here, John Kasper. I hate him already.
No, literally, get out of here.
Seriously. So he's like a carpet bagging racist? That's ridiculous.
Absolutely. He's a carpet bagger. So yeah, Merchantville, New Jersey, nowhere near the Mason-Dixon line, nowhere near Tennessee. And also, John Kasper did not become a jackass as an adult. He was kind of a dipshit of a kid. So his parents shipped him off to military school because little shit starter, a little troublemaker. He didn't do too well in military school either. In fact, he got expelled from one of them because he had this outburst in a Sunday school meeting where he was like yelling at all the church members that they were like fakes and hypocrites.
Wow.
Yeah. What?
Oh, wow.
Still, not only did he manage to graduate from high school, but he got good enough grades to make it into an Ivy League school. Want to guess which one?
Oh, God.
It's one that's been in the headlines a shit ton lately.
Is it Columbia?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. He went to Columbia.
Weak for Columbia.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that like most of the kids there would spit in his face today, or at least I hope so.
Yeah.
While he was at Columbia, he became fixated on this fascist poet named Ezra Pound, who was incarcerated in the psychiatric facility in D.C., trying to avoid prosecution charges for treason for his radio broadcast in support of Hitler, Mussolini, and the Holocaust during World War II.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. During his junior year, Kasper went to D.C. to meet Ezra, and the two of them began writing letters back and forth for almost a decade. Ezra had a huge influence on him, even picking out his friends.
What?
Yeah. Ezra Pound picked out his friends from a psychiatric facility in D.C.
That's bizarre.
So weird as hell, right? When John graduated from college, he tried to join the military, but they said he was unfit. No, I don't know why. I don't know why. So he goes back to New York, where he opens up this bookstore, which he names the Make It New Bookshop after a 1935 collection of Ezra's poetry. Mm-hmm. Pretty soon, he partners with another Ezra Pound devotee and opens up Square Dollar Publishing. I don't know how you pronounce it because it's like Square $$ Publishing. What types of folks do you think he publishes?
Nazis? Is it like
white
supremacist books? Jesus. So he opens up a Nazi bookshop and imprint.
Yeah, they focused on publishing fascist and anti-Semitic writers. Now, John is confusing, okay? So, because at the exact same time, he joins the National Renaissance Party, which was dedicated to anti-Semitism, and invited that party to come and use his bookstore. I'm sorry, not anti-Semitism, rather. Sorry, fighting anti-Semitism, and invited them to use his bookstore as like a meeting place. He also,
why would they want to meet there?
I don't know. Because I guess you can't Google people.
Do you think that he just liked the idea of them having meetings surrounded by all these like anti-Semitic books? Was it like
maybe, but it gets weirder. So he also attended NAACP meetings and distributed their material at his store. He helped a mixed race couple find housing, and he dated a Black woman himself. And according to some FBI dossiers, slept with a Black man.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But the FBI is fucking weird, so who knows if that's true or not.
That is, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
John Kasper. Terrible and confusing.
Weird as shit. Weird as shit. So about a year before he goes to Tennessee and our main story starts, his New York bookstore closes down, probably because of bankruptcy. We don't really know. And he moved to D.C. to be closer to Ezra, and he opened a new bookstore there. And that apparently is where his anti-Semitism develops into full-blown white supremacy.
Wow.
While he's there, he meets this Alabama segregationist who told him about the upcoming plan to integrate the high school in Clinton, Tennessee. And he's like, this is my mission. This is my cause.
Wow.
This is I'm going to fight school desegregation. And I have found my calling. Still in the North, still nowhere near Tennessee. So in 1956, while still in D.C., he joins the Seaboard White Citizens Council. Their motto was honor, fight, save the white. I saw that on placards so many times while I was researching the Nashville school desegregation movement. It was like their big thing. He wrote and published pamphlets for the organization, and pretty soon he had appointed himself as the executive secretary. Sorry. The gall of a white man, right? To just appoint yourself the executive secretary. And in the summer, in the summer of 1956, he kind of takes to the road as a spokesperson for segregation. He's going to all these different rallies across all these different states, Maryland, Virginia, speaking for segregation. On August 4th, he was arrested for distributing handbills without a license. On August 18th, he held his first rally. And you want to guess where it was?
I'm scared.
Do it. Lean into the fear.
Was it in Clinton or was it in...
No, it is in another very eerie type of place that is, has its own recent history with this sort of thing.
Oh, God. Is it Charlotte?
It's Charlottesville, Virginia.
Charlottesville, Virginia. Oh, my
Yeah.
God. Wow.
How fucking
What's
creepy.
up with Charlottesville? Jesus.
I mean, it's Virginia, babe.
Holy moly. Yeah, Virginia in general. It's true. That's where James Buchanan was from as well. All the shitty people. Amazing.
Awesome. I mean, there are some other shitty people too, but
that's true. Wow. Okay. So Charlottesville. So basically we can just imagine like what we saw in recent history, but like with maybe slightly different fashion.
I don't think he was just getting his start there. So he's not super influential. It's not like he's a grand dragon or anything. Okay. And also, he's a freaking carpetbagger, okay? Like, it's not like he's going to show up and the crowds are going to be waiting for him. So after some more rabble-rousing like that, he lands himself in Clinton by late August. And he's like itching for a fight, doesn't know a soul. But like as soon as he gets off the bus, he's wandering around town asking any white person he saw, they're going to integrate the school system here on Monday. What do you want to do about it? That's my John Kasper impression. What do you think?
Nice. I like it.
Because that's kind of like what people sounded like.
Do about it?
Exactly.
Especially like Northeasterners in the 50s.
Exactly. In the 50s. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I am texting you a picture of John Kasper, and I want you to tell me what he looks like.
Oh, God. Where's my phone? Okay. All right. Okay. What do you see there?
Which one is he? The tall one?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the one with the hat. Tall boy? Okay, interesting. Well, he's very tall, and he's like in a suit, very like tall and thin. He definitely just has like a dickish face, I would say.
Very punchable, right?
Yeah, like he just looks like he's about to say, well, actually.
I think he actually did say that like a lot. You're totally right.
Oh, man. Well, it's good when someone's face matches their personality.
Oh, 1000%. He has an extremely punchable face, and I want you to hold that in your mind. So his presence really irritated both the white middle class folks of Clinton, Tennessee, who, is important to note, did not want integration, but wanted to follow law and keep the order. And that is because they wanted to preserve their reputation. They didn't want to be seen as like these backward hicks. So many times in my research, I found people saying, this is Tennessee, this isn't Birmingham, this isn't Mississippi, right? Because they want to be seen as more cultured, as more, more orderly, more educated than the rest of the South. Tennessee really saw itself as better than the Deep South, in particular, Alabama and Mississippi. However, the white lower class people really saw Mississippi and Alabama as the gold standard. They really, like, if you said, I'm bringing in some segregationists from Alabama, they would be like, oh my God, let's roll out the red carpet. And it was also really difficult for me to see that being from both Birmingham and Mississippi. Like I am researching my family and my Tennessee roots, but like I grew up in Birmingham and Mississippi. So to see them constantly being like, yeah, we're racist, but we're not like those backwards assholes in Alabama and Tennessee and Alabama and Mississippi was crazy because like this is 1957. Birmingham has not become Bombingham yet.
That's right.
So
that's right.
What is this like? Mm-hmm. Okay. And as you will see, there are a lot of bombs that go off in this story. And I just he was also pretty loathed by the white supremacists there in Clinton because they actually were organized on their own. So it became kind of like insulting to have this carpetbagger show up and be like, we're going to get organized against the integrated schools. Aren't you mad about this? And we're like, where the fuck? We've been mad about this. Where did you come from? But they also see him as someone who has these connections to the broader white supremacist and segregationist movement across the country. And so they're like, well, maybe this guy can be useful. So that's kind of how he fits into the mix. But I want to take a quick step back and talk about what happens in Clinton, Tennessee. So Clinton, Tennessee was the first school to integrate under Brown versus Board of Education. It gets often written out of history, and people think that Little Rock was the first school to integrate under Brown versus Board of Education. But Clinton was the year before that in 1956. And it was incredibly violent. There were near lynchings, there were cross burnings, there were bombings. Like some of the stories that I read about that took place within the school include things like the white girls would walk on the black girls' heels until blood ran into their shoes.
It's so like deeply psychotic, just like the way that
the hysteria of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
One black girl was almost thrown out of a window into her death. There were, of course, the like mobs outside of the school. There were people night riding, basically, like, you know, in full Klan regalia, riding through the black neighborhood, which was up on a hill above the rest of the town. And one of the stories that really stuck with me was when this boy was in class and he feels somebody threw something around his neck and he thinks it is a toy snake. And then he was like, but he didn't want to move because he didn't want to give them the reaction that they wanted. And then the snake moved and he realized it was a live snake that someone threw around his neck.
My God,
I would be no good after that. I'm so terrified of snakes. I wouldn't have been able to make it. So anyhow, John Kasper gets to town, pretty quickly starts raising hell and continuously gets arrested. He gets arrested for vagrancy. He gets arrested for attempting to incite a riot, urging children to stay out of school, circulating inflammatory literature, inciting, vitriol against elected officials, all sorts of things. The first time he gets thrown in jail, nobody comes forward to pay his $5,000 bail. So he kind of sits in jail for a couple of days. And then the charges get dismissed. But he very quickly becomes the scapegoat for the politicians and the press to say, none of this existed before John Kasper came to town. Right. So they can say this is an outside agitator, very much the same way that they do with like civil rights agitators.
Right.
Everything was fine until all these other people came to jail. And it was interesting to see them say this on the segregationist side.
Interesting. That's interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's so much here that I could say, but basically John Kasper makes inroads with the Clinton segregationists. He goes to various meetings and rallies. He's nominating himself as a speaker and a leader, and he keeps doing things that make it very clear that he is not from the South. Like he's constantly referring to the white people at these rallies as hardworking hillbillies. And that's an insult.
That's a very insulting. I'm just like, but that's the thing is like, okay, if this guy who is like a not, I don't know. I'm just like, I'm sorry, this guy's not like a likable person, and he's calling people hillbillies. Like
exactly.
So he's able to whip everybody up. Then like obviously they were just waiting to be asked,
And they were already whipped up. That's the other thing that gets lost in this.
Yeah.
Like they're like, well, the crowds got bigger after John Kasper got there. Yeah, but John Kasper got there real damn early. So there might have been like a small crowd on the very first day that the Black kids go to school, and then the crowds get bigger and they blame that on John Kasper. That doesn't mean the crowds weren't already going to get bigger. Maybe I think what was more likely is that they assumed that the Black kids weren't going to be there that long. And then as it goes on and on, the crowds get bigger and bigger and bigger. So he also kind of keeps making everything about the Jews.
People are like, what?
Who? This is post-World War II, so people do know like of Jews, but there aren't a lot of them in
they're like,
Tennessee.
What does that have to do with this issue? That's
wow. Right?
Wow.
So it got weird, right? But still, he manages to build a good amount of influence in the community, and as that happened, like I said, he's painted more and more by the press and the politicians as the ringleader because they just did not want to believe that this was a homegrown movement. But that's also building tension with the local white supremacists because he's stealing their credit. It's interesting to look at the tension that existed between middle-class white people who saw themselves as the leaders of the community and kind of thought, well, if we say we're going to go ahead with law and order, then the lower-class whites will follow us. What they did not seem to realize is that the lower-class whites hate them. Mm-hmm. And the only and taking away the one privilege they felt that they had, which was superiority over Black people, now I really hate you. And when I was reading about that, it really showed me like the white Democrats versus white Republicans.
Interesting.
Like I feel like nothing at all has been learned by that. And by this continual writing of history as though John Kasper and people like them were just these out-of-town rabble-rousers in the segregationist movement allows you to ignore that, no, there really is a problem over here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. It's like, oh, this sounds familiar. Very unfortunately, like, I feel like all of this sounds very, present day as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So much of it.
Depressingly so. Yeah. Yeah.
So this sort of thing creates this dynamic where John is in and out of jail and court, and when he's in court, he really flourished in giving these wild speeches where he likened Brown versus Board of Education to prohibition and saying it's up to the people to fight these sorts of unjust decisions. And he keeps winding in and out of jail on bond. And at one point, 2 people took out liens on their home to pay his $10,000 bond. So he does have some supporters. But at one point, he tries to demand that the local white supremacists bring their organizations under the umbrella of his Seaboard White Citizens Council thing, and they refused and wound up expelling him from their organization. And here's a story that I just think is funny. He gets indicted on some more charges, and then it's this injunction, and then he winds up going missing. Nobody knows where John Kasper is. And then he turns up at this rally, and the marshal who was supposed to arrest him or serve him his injunction sees him and goes to arrest him. And it turns into like this wild goose chase where he's like almost in the car, and then he slips through the legs of the guy who's embracing him, and he like runs through the crowd. And it's like something out of the Three fucking Stooges. Like, it's crazy. These 2 white girls put themselves into the police car so that John Kasper can't fit. And like, it was like this whole thing of trying to arrest him. It was like trying to arrest a dog. So they take him to jail. And then over the course of these many little trials for vagrancy and all these little things, he keeps winding up getting found not guilty. In this particular case, the white supremacists are taken to the stand to testify as to how unimportant John Kasper was to their efforts. And again, he's found not guilty and put back out on the street. But they keep trying to put him behind bars because they're like, if we stop him, we'll stop the whole movement, which is clearly not the case, because even during these times that he's in jail,
it's still the movement keeps
building and building and building. So eventually, and we're still in 1956, the place where he lives in his house and keeps his organization gets bombed while he wasn't there. And he winds up not really going back to Clinton for more than a few days, a month after that. But by then, things are kicking off in Nashville. So he's got a new thing. He's got a new bit. He is only in Nashville until November before he's put in jail based on some of his bullshit from Clinton. But that's long enough to bring a whole lot of damage and to, again, gain him this reputation of being the ringleader and bringing the white supremacist violence with him. Again, it existed long before him. As I was researching, 1955 into 1957, as the court case that my grandfather filed and all of these other efforts are underway, you can see the steady drumbeat of white supremacist violence building and building and building. And it was largely, I don't know. So people will say that it was largely white supremacists or like what folks down south call white trash, like lower class white folks who were the most virulent and the most organized around it. But it wasn't them alone. It was also a lot of working class and middle class folks who were staunchly against it. Like there were people there who were like business leaders. My grandmother got fired from her job at the pet milk company because of her participation in this. That's somebody with money who decided to fire her.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. And that shows up in your book too. Is that a spoiler? Sorry. But I was
pretty
like,
early on, so I
that.
don't think it's
okay.
I wouldn't call it a spoiler.
That was a real detail. That's interesting. Yeah.
No, that really happened.
If people are getting
That's how
fired,
she wound up working at Fisk University because they were like, well, they appreciated what my family was doing and they created a position for her and she stayed there until the 1970s. And so people who went to Fisk University in the 1970s or 60s, and you say Mary Clyde, well, they wouldn't have known her middle name, Mary Griffith, they're going to probably have she would find a way to get people into school.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, that was my grandmother. So he's only in Nashville till November, but the enrollment starts in August. I found pictures of him outside of my aunt's school on registration day. So that was the school he chose to focus on. It was called Glenn Elementary School. It was in East Nashville. And he's just like out there riling the crowd up on registration day. Like in Clinton, he led these rallies and meetings while he was in Nashville. I think he learned not to do the whole hillbilly thing while he was there, but he still tried to position himself as a leader, and folks were all too happy to oblige to make him the scapegoat. So my mother told me that she remembered my grandfather going to meet with him. And while I was doing my research, I was able to find this news clipping about John Kasper going to a meeting with Negro leaders at Clark Memorial Methodist Church, which was my grandfather's church. So it's a very good chance that they actually did meet, but it doesn't sound like it did a whole lot of good. A lot of people say that the climax of the Nashville school desegregation movement happened in October 1957 when the Hattie Cotton School was bombed, and it was this brand new school. They bombed it in the wee hours of the morning, so nobody was hurt, but it was still this devastating moment. And that, again, was blamed on John Kasper. He went to jail the next month because of what he did in Clinton. But later on, in 1958, he went to school for this. Or not went to school for this. He went to jail for this. Right. So what I think is that's pretty much the end of his involvement in the school desegregation movement. But I just think it's very funny that he had all these complaints about jail. He complained about the food, said that needed to be fixed immediately. But his main complaint about jail was that it was desegregated, or rather that it was integrated. So while he's in jail, while he's in jail, he got punched in the face by a black man.
Who was that hero?
Not all heroes wear capes. Some of them wear stripes.
Oh my God. Wow.
So this is a letter that he wrote someone while he was in jail. He said, "I am nearly broken by jails, niggers and rock quarries, and the cruel life that this is."
Wow.
Yeah. I am also sending you another image. This is a political cartoon that was in a newspaper in Nashville around the time that he went to jail.
Also, again, I just want to point out that this guy is like very tall. So now the image of him like slipping out of policemen's like cars and arms and stuff seems even more ridiculous. Okay.
His job while he was in jail was breaking rocks.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh my God, this is hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what are you seeing there?
It's like a men's dress shoe, kind of, or maybe like a boot. And it says outraged citizenry on the boot. And then it's kicking a man and his hat is flying off. This hat seems to be like part of his whole shtick too, by the way.
He wears a lot of hats.
Yeah. So his hat's falling off and on the sleeve it says Kasper. So it's the outraged citizen kicking Kasper out of
in the ass
to get out of town. Get out of here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they don't want him there. Or at least they would like people to believe they don't want him there.
Here's another funny thing. So I found this. This was written in the Nashville magazine in 1978. It says, many say that John Kasper went on to become an executive for a German car dealership in Nashville. But when you call the place, they claim to have never heard of the man.
Oh, interesting.
I find that very funny because they were like, yeah, we might be a used car dealership, but we know not to associate with that dude.
With that guy. Yeah. Wow.
He also ran for president later on. I believe it was 1960. He did not win. So that's great. He also, during the 1970s, he returned to Merchantville, New Jersey, where he'd grown up. Around then, he was working as an accountant for a train company. Also at that time, he fathered a child named Ruth Ann Rose, who was born December 1978. But after she was born, Kasper left the area. So he's a deadbeat dad.
Jesus.
Yeah.
After she was born, he left the area. Indeed.
I bet he fucking
this guy
did.
just like sucks on every measure.
He really fucking sucks.
Also, a good reminder that like people never just suck in one area of their lives.
Exactly. Why would you? People are multifaceted. He remarried in 1992 in Florida. He had 3 children, and his new wife is Vietnamese. So he winds up in an interracial relationship with 3 biracial children.
Wow.
Yeah, and he dies in a boating accident in Florida in 1998. 1998 is also the year that my aunt had her first child.
Wow.
So somehow that feels like some sort of cosmic thing to me. But yeah, this dude sucked up until his very last day.
Yeah. Jesus.
Yeah.
But also like a good, I don't know. This is why, as you know, I spend a lot of time in archives because it's fun. How much fun is it going to an archive, Mary?
Oh my God. It is a freaking
amazing
blast. I had so much fun.
Yeah, it's fun. Like seeing all like, I don't know. Well, sitting in a library all day is fun in general, but then also, yeah, getting to like sift through all this history. And there are so many of these stories that like we just don't hear about. But yeah, like I don't know. It's funny because I know you didn't integrate like the details of this particular man and what he was doing, but there was very much a sense in the book that of a bunch of adults spending a lot of like time and energy to fuck with little kids. Like,
exactly.
What's wrong with you?
Exactly. And we're talking little kids, right? Because Nashville, I don't think I mentioned this detail. Nashville was the first elementary school to desegregate under Brown versus Board of Education. And it is also lost to history because it happened at the exact same time as Little Rock. And Little Rock was more violent simply because the kids are bigger and they can be more violent with each other. So Nashville is like a bunch of first graders, like how violent can you really be with each other? I mean, you can be a little shit, trust me. They were not nice to my aunt, but the type of violence that they just don't have that type of physicality in the first grade. And so yeah, Nashville is actually a really important story that I feel like needs to be unearthed, and not just because it's my family story. So yeah, I wanted to.
Super interesting. And because it's like, I'm sure it's not the only one of these like stories that hasn't been told too. It's important for people to
there's a lot of them.
All that. Yeah.
I mean, I think people think that all of these schools were integrating at the same time, and they were not. Clinton was the first school, period. And then Nashville was the first elementary school. There were other schools that integrated before Nashville, but they were not part of integrating as a reaction to Brown versus Board of Education. So, for example, Eisenhower dictated that all the schools had to integrate on federal land. So if it was on a military base, it integrated in the 40s. And then there was a school in South Carolina that integrated before Brown versus Board of Education. According to what I and the archivists were able to find, it seems like the South Carolina school was pretty nonviolent. However, that doesn't mean that it was, because people like to whitewash history. So there's that. But Nashville was the first one to integrate as a response to Brown versus Board of Education. And people think that it was Ruby Bridges. So I see that all the time, that Ruby Bridges was the first to integrate an elementary school. And it really it drives my aunt crazy. Or not really drives her crazy. Like, it hurts her feelings because she feels like she's been erased. But at the same time, it's like, well, no one knows the story, partially because you don't talk about it. And you don't talk about it because you can't talk about it because it's so crazy traumatizing.
Exactly. Yeah, but then that also feeds into, I imagine, like feeling really hurt that she's been erased because like she went through this traumatic experience.
Right.
That, the only benefit of was that it, would benefit other people really. And then other people aren't even acknowledging it. It's awful.
They don't know, right? It's just been completely erased. And so, yeah, I see a lot of parallels to climate in the way that this whole thing plays out. I think, the way that people ignore the fringe and think that they're just going to tire themselves out. And I think that's what a lot of people thought in this movement, right? Like a lot of the quote unquote white moderates who, again, didn't want integration, but wanted to follow the law, thought like, oh, just let them get their, vitriol out of their system. And when it's time to integrate, it'll be fine. Like they actually assured my grandfather that the police were going to protect them. There wasn't going to be any violence. It was going to be okay. And my grandfather actually believed them. And I found this article that was about like the arguments that my grandparents had about this. My grandfather was like, no, they're going to have the police there and it's going to protect us. And my grandmother was like, have you ever seen a Tennessee policeman protect a Negro? Have you ever seen that? And of course that didn't happen. Right.
Yeah.
And
so, wow.
Yeah, there are just so many ways that the school desegregation movement is misunderstood. And since we have a few minutes, I'm just going to say, like, one of the things I learned is not to call it school integration, because that really was not the goal. The goal was desegregation. The goal was getting rid of Jim Crow and getting rid of all these messages that were sent from all over society to Black children that they were inferior and they were not good enough, that they were expendable. It wasn't about being up under white people. That was never the point. The other thing that I think it often gets misunderstood is people assume that the entire civil rights movement was nonviolent. School desegregation was not nonviolent. Obviously, the white supremacists were violent in every facet of this thing, but actually the Black parents were not nonviolent and didn't ascribe to nonviolence as a concept because these are their children. So they were armed. I found articles about, there was a picture of the sheriff and he had all of these guns that he had confiscated from Black parents in Nashville because they're not going to show up to those mobs unarmed with their children. They're just not going to do it. There was a Black woman who was arrested taking her child to school because she had a knife on her. I remember hearing a story about when my grandparents took Aunt Jackie to school, there was a janitor there who said, if anybody touches your daughter, she won't be the only one who gets hurt because I have a knife on me. My grandfather rather had guns. They had men who would come to the house with guns and keep watch. So it wasn't nonviolent at all.
But that's like because that's a self-defense thing. Like
exactly. So it wasn't violent, but it was self-defense.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So anyhow, yeah. So these are some of the details that was difficult to put into the novel and have Cora tell those stories honestly, because she just wouldn't have known them. Also, in the novel, I'm talking about someone who's deeply traumatized. So it's not like she went back and did the research later and was trying to find out more about it later. She wanted to bury it deep down. And that's also not a spoiler. So anyhow, I just wanted a space to be able to share some of these tidbits. And there's so much more.
Fascinating. It's so fascinating. And yeah, like I said, even though, you can't get into the details in the story, I feel like the result of all of that definitely comes through. And the feeling that like, there were, I don't know, just how ridiculous it is. Like, it's just it's gross, that like,
I feel like you see it in the Zionists.
Totally. Oh, and like the way that they're treating university kids right now too.
The way, not just that, like the way that they're just like looking at the Zionists over in Israel destroy supplies meant for babies
kids
in Gaza.
Yes, you're right. It's like this total dehumanization of even little kids. I think it's like, I don't know. I think people would like to believe that other humans wouldn't carry like those kinds of ideas to children. But like, yeah, that's how it works. If you're dehumanizing someone on the basis of their race or their religion or whatever else, like you do not see their kids as kids either, which is really, it's gross.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot that can be learned from, school desegregation, civil rights movement for the climate movement. And that was why part of why I wanted to put those things into conversation with one another. And I think
and you've done that in essays before too. Like, I feel like I actually like, I often credit you with being like the person that really kind of brought that intersection to a lot of climate people that were not already thinking about it. So it's cool to see it in novel form now. It's very good.
I always kind of felt dissatisfied when I put it in an essay form. And I felt like this is something I need to show and not something I can tell. And I feel like as long as the climate movement feels like it's starting from scratch and doing something that's never been done before, it deprives itself of the ability to learn from previous movements, right? Like this is not the first time people have had to fight for their lives. This is not the first time we've gone up against this seemingly unmovable systemic oppression. So let's look back
an
at
existential threat or
exactly.
Totally.
So I think it's important to put these things in conversations and not treat previous generations as though they are at fault for climate change. I mean, John Kasper might be, but my grandfather isn't. And so, there's just so much that we can learn from people who have fought for their lives before us. So anyhow, bottom line, buy my book.
Perfect. That's a great note to end on. Buy Mary's book. No, we'll put a link in the show notes. Of course. But yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for bringing that story and doing all that research. And yeah, I'm excited that this book is out there for people to read and also to see for themselves. Like, oh yeah, these two things are definitely in conversation with each other. It's very helpful.
Exactly.
Spill is a climate news and culture podcast brought to you by the teams behind Drilled and Hot Take. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. This episode was engineered by Peter Duff. You can find the stories that we mentioned in this episode on the Drilled website at drilled.media. Go check them out.